The question is that this bill be now read a second time. I call the member for Kooyong.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on the Fair Work Bill 2012, and in doing so, I follow some excellent speeches by my colleagues, and I'd like to pay tribute to the member for Wannon, the member for Mayo, the member for Farrer, and of course the member for Bradfield, who's done, as the member for Wannon said, some very important work both publicly and in this House in shining a light on this union-dominated racket that we call our superannuation funds. Acting Deputy Speaker, I was recently asked, what do I dislike about the Labor Party most? At the top of my mind was economic mismanagement. Then I thought about the class warfare that they embark on. And then I thought, what really irks me most about this Labor Party is that it's beholden to the union movement. Only 12% of the private sector workforce in Australia is a member of a union, and about 18% of the total Australian workforce. But you know what? 100% of the front bench of those opposite are members of the union. 70% of the caucus are members of the union. And the Minister for Industrial Relations, the fox in charge of the hen house, was the former secretary of one of our major unions. You do not call that democracy, that you call that a union-dominated Labor agenda. And we've seen it play out so many times. In the decision to lift compulsory superannuation from 9% to 12%, which will see $8 billion a year plough its way back to industry super funds. In the 10 appointments that were made to the Fair Work Australia, between December 2009 and December 2011. Out of those 10 appointments, 8 had union backgrounds. 8 had union backgrounds. You do not call that democracy. You again call that a union-dominated agenda. And in today's bill that we have before this House, where the Labor Party is seeking to deny the Productivity Commission's recommendation that they should open up default super beyond industry superannuation funds, to retail funds, to other funds. What we have again is another example of a union-dominated Labor agenda. Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, the superannuation industry in Australia is huge. $1.4 trillion are under management. In 2011-12, $90 billion of new money flowed into superannuation. And the industry super funds are the giants among this superannuation industry. In 2011, they had $250 billion under management. In 2009-10, industry super funds received 31% of the $78 billion that was contributed to super, not including self-managed funds during this period. And Australian Super, which we know that the Minister has had a personal relationship with, is also a major fund. Now, the Institute of Public Affairs, a very reputable organisation, has done a study, and it's found that across 166 modern awards approved by Fair Work Australia, there were 566 super funds, of which 513 of the 566 super funds were industry or public sector funds. They were the default funds for millions and billions of dollars. And what happens is that these industry super funds typically choose up to half of their directors from the unions. The unions get to nominate up to half of their directors. So I ask you the question, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, why should more than 10 million people in these industry funds have to pay directors' fees to half of those directors that come from union backgrounds when the unions only have just over 1 million members across the country? This is a closed shop. This is anti-competitive. It lacks transparency and it lines the pockets of union members. So in the 30 seconds I have left, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, I promise you that on this side of the House we have an alternative.
Member for Kooyong's time has expired.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time. The member for Kooyong has the call.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This bill from this government is about a closed shop. It's anti-competitive. It's putting the workers last and politics first. Let's face it, those on the other side have 100% of their front bench who are members of the union. 70% of their caucus are members of the union. If you go to a Labor conference, 50% of the votes go to the union. But when you look at the workforce of Australia, only 12% of the private sector workforce are members of the union, and only 18% of the general workforce are members of the union. Why won't you give the workers of Australia a free choice about who their default super fund should be? Industry super funds are in the pockets of the unions, and who knows this best? The Minister for Industrial Relations and Workplace Relations. He knows this best because he was a director himself. He was a director himself of an industry super fund, and now he is the fox in charge of the hen house. He is the fox in charge of the hen house. The Productivity Commission, Madam Speaker, the Productivity Commission has made a recommendation that this government should extend default super funds much broader than it currently does to just industry super funds. And we know on our side that if we get our chance in government, we will extend default super funds to any MySuper compliant super fund. This is about allowing the market to determine where the workers choose to place their super funds. We have $1.4 trillion in superannuation in this country, a massive amount of money. And the workers of Australia should have the right and the choice to determine, and the freedom to determine where their money goes. And when it comes to the Liberal Party, choice and freedom is essential to our DNA. It doesn't matter if it's in health, with the private health insurance that's been cut by your side. It doesn't matter whether it's in education, when it comes to private schools, independent and Catholic schools which you have sought to deny funding to. Or it doesn't matter if it's in workplace relations and the superannuation industry. So, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, many of my colleagues on this side have spoken passionately and with conviction about the rort that is currently taking place before our very eyes. A rort that is in the interest only of the union movement and not the workers of Australia. A rort that is against the Productivity Commission's very recommendations. And, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, with such important legislation before this House, you would think there was proper scrutiny. You would think that we would have weeks to look at the legislation, to consult the stakeholders. We were given less than 24 hours to look at this legislation. Shame on you. Shame on you, the member for Maribyrnong. Our parliamentary draftsman didn't even have time to to draft the amendments that we wanted to bring. Why are you hiding from scrutiny? Why are you hiding from scrutiny? You know why the member for Maribyrnong is hiding from scrutiny? Because he doesn't want the Australian people to know about this cover-up. He doesn't want the Australian people to know that it's his mates in the union movement that are the ones who are going to benefit. You don't want members of the Australian public, or indeed more than 10 million people who are in industry super funds, to know that industry super funds typically ask for more than 50% of their directors to come from the unions, to be nominated by the unions, so that these directors can supplement their income with the directorship of these industry super funds. We know that Fair Work Australia has been discredited with the Thompson affair. We know that in the last 10 appointments to Fair Work Australia between December 2009 and December 2011, 8 of them had union backgrounds. 8 out of 10 had union backgrounds. The member for Wannon asked me, how many had union backgrounds? 8 out of 10 appointments to Fair Work Australia between December 2009 and December 2011 had union backgrounds. The member for Maribyrnong may want to know, why has the government increased compulsory super from 9 to 12%? And the reason is this will see more than $8 billion annually go into industry super funds. And who are the big beneficiaries in industry super funds? It's the unions. It's the unions that dominate the Labor Party, that dictate the policy of the Labor Party. Let me remind the House and all those that are listening around Australia to this telecast that only 12% of Australians working in the private sector workforce, 12%, 12% in the workforce are members of unions. 12%. And in the general Australian workforce, only 18% are in the workforce. But when it comes to the front bench, and I'm looking at you, the member for Maribyrnong, 100% are members of the union. 100%. And when it comes to the caucus, 70%. 70% of the caucus are members of the union. Sorry, 100% of your front bench are members of the union and 70% of your caucus are former union officials. 70% of your caucus are former union officials. And we talk about the gene pool of the Labor Party shrinking before our eyes. We know why. We know why. It's because the unions are dominating the membership of the other side. And when it comes to the workforce, more and more members of the Australian workforce are giving up their union ticket because they want to have a say where their money goes. And they want flexibility in the workplace. They want you to change your unfair dismissal laws. Yeah, I want you to loosen up your unfair dismissal laws. We want to get the regulation off the back of small business. We want to see some freedom in the workplace, rather than just the unions dominating the show. Why did you increase super from 9 to 12%? Because you wanted to see $8 billion a year flow back into the industry super funds. Why does 50%, member for Maribyrnong, why does 50% of the caucus of your votes, why does 50% of your votes at your federal conference automatically go to the Labor Party? Why has 8 out of the last 10 appointments of Fair Work Australia gone to people with union backgrounds? Yeah. Why don't pie shop workers have choice, as the member for Wannon says? Why doesn't pie shop workers have choice? Even those who can't even warm a pie should have choice. Those who serve a cold pie and those who serve a warm pie should have choice. The problem is that in every aspect of workplace relations on your watch, we have seen a re-regulation of the labour market. And this has cost jobs, this has sent up wages, and this has seen lower productivity. Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, the CEO of Santos, David Knox, has said on the front page of the Financial Review that if he was to open a gas facility in the Gulf of Mexico, it would be 1/3 of the price of opening a similar facility in Australia. And why? It's because wages are out of control in this country. And productivity, by any international standard, is falling in this country. And we have more than 5 million Australians employed in small business, in more than 2 million small businesses, and they complain every day to me about the unfair dismissals and the penalty rates, may I say, that this other side has introduced. Well, we need to get a smarter, more efficient and more effective workforce, and we don't do that by letting the unions dictate the policies. Fair Work Australia is discredited under this government. Productivity has come down. Wages have gone up, and we haven't seen an improvement in the bottom line of companies. When we look around the world, we see that the economic troubles that are facing Europe, the United States and elsewhere. But what has this government decided to do? It has decided to re-regulate the workforce, send productivity down and wages up, with no commensurate gain for the Australian people. And on this particular legislation before this House, we are seeing them play a sop to the union movement. Their union masters are dictating the policy that they bring into this House. And this is a bad outcome for the workers of Australia, because the Productivity Commission, an independent body which so often provides intelligent information for this House to consider, has found that you need to broaden out the default super funds beyond the industry super funds alone. And the industry super funds are a reflection of the vested interests of the union movement. And this goes back to the Hawke and Keating years in the 1990s, when they sought to put industry super funds at the centre of our workplace relations system. They sought to put the industry super funds at the centre of the workplace relations system. Why do more than 50% of the directors on the industry super funds come from the union movement, when the union movement is only 12% of the private sector workforce and about 18% of the general workforce? And when the numbers of people who are prepared to pay their union money have gone down year after year after year. People, Mr Acting Deputy Speaker, are voting with their feet. So I say to the members on this side of the House, we will take a tough stance. We will take a strong stance against the union-dominated Labor Party, which is producing bad policy for the people based on politics alone. Default super funds deserve to be expanded beyond just industry funds. And that's why we on this House will support changes in government, and we on this House, do not tolerate the bad legislation from this government.
Order.